Okay, enough talk with no action. In this video, I'll show you exactly what the fuss is about, why Maestro is one of the most exciting features in the UiPath platform for a long time. And I say that not just looking back in time, but also looking out the front windscreen. So let's dig in. So in a couple of my away from keyboard videos, and you'll find a link to those in the description below, I've talked about why it's time to get excited about UiPath agents and UiPath's new BPMN-style development tool and runtime, commonly known as Maestro. And in another video, I built an agent from the ground up. There'll be a link to that up here somewhere. So now it's time to tie some of that stuff together in what's called an agentic process. We'll deploy it and then see it come to life right inside of Maestro. So before we really get to it, I want to just show you what I've pre-built inside of my platform here. This is a platform that is mostly empty, but what I've built are three different things. I've built a workflow that is workflow that can, let's just have a look. It's called PO Extractor. It can extract data from a purchase order. Then we have what's called a bike shop agents folder. Inside of that, we have a credit limit agent. It's an agent that can basically determine whether or not a manager needs to approve a purchase order before confirming it back to the customer, depending on the value of the purchase order. And then we have bike shop apps. That is basically a web app that will show that manager the information that he or she needs in order to approve or reject that purchase order. So this is pre-built. In addition to these things, in my shared folder, I have a couple of storage buckets. Storage buckets are basically places to put files. One storage bucket is simply called documents. It holds one document. It's called terms and conditions. That is a document that defines when does a manager need to approve a purchase order above or below a certain amount. It could be a very complex document. In this case, it is not. That document is then used inside what's called an index. And an index is something that the large language model that we use inside the agent can use to return to us the question that we're asking the agent. And basically, we're asking the agent, do we need to have manual approval of this purchase order? The agent will then consult the documents inside of this index. I made a complete video on what's called context grounding. That's what this is. So I'll put a link to that in the description as well. Otherwise, you can find it in my channel. You can subscribe to that and get lots of free videos. Anyways, that's one of the storage buckets. The other storage buckets is called purchase orders. And guess what? Inside of that, we just have a number of purchase orders that we're going to use when running our process. In addition to the storage buckets, what I have also is in integration service, as it's called. I have two connections in my shared folder. And the connections are for Microsoft Outlook 365. That's because we want to send email from within our process. And then to something called Data Fabric. And Data Fabric is basically, at least in the context of this video, it's a data store where we can store simple data. In reality, Data Fabric can do a whole lot more, but that's again for another video. In this video, we're just going to use Data Fabric as a simple data store. If we just take a quick look at it, what it contains is basically one entity, as it's called, kind of like a table in a database. It's called order system, and that table contains only one field. It's called order ID. So if I want to add data to this entity, all I have to enter is an order ID number here. The reason why I want to do that is because that will then trigger the process to run once we've built out the process. So in order to build out the process, because we want more than just these apps and agents and RPA workflows, we want another folder in here for our business process. So that's what we're going to do now inside of UiPath Studio Web. So open UiPath Studio Web. Here we can see the three projects I already built. We'll create a new project. That'll be an agentic process. And this will take us into this new BPMN-style canvas where we can design our business process. So the first thing we want to do in here is we are going to add a couple of tasks to our process. We'll just add one task and then another one after that. The first task is going to be the task that extracts the purchase order from a document and delivers some data from that. And we'll get back to how it does that in just a second. We'll just draw out the entire process first and then get back to the implementation steps. The next step here is our credit limit evaluation. So we'll just call this one credit limit agent. This is where we call that agent that will determine whether or not the amount of the purchase order is too high for automatic approval. So the outcome of this can be either it's too high or not too high in order for it to be automatically approved. So we want to use an exclusive gateway, as it's called. This is basically a decision point in your process. So this can have two outcomes. Again, everything's good or everything is not so good. So we can take one path or the other. So this one up here is basically when everything is good. We can auto approve the purchase order. And if we auto approve it, we want to send a confirmation email to the customer saying, yes, you placed this order, everything is good. The other outcome can be that we need manual approval. So I'll just call this one requires approval, like that. So if we require approval, what we want to have happen is to present the purchase order or the relevant information from the purchase order to a manager. So we'll call this one manager approval, like that. And of course, manager approval, if you've ever had a manager, can have several outcomes. In this case, two. So we are going to add another exclusive gateway, and one outcome can be that everything is cool. And then we'll send the order confirmation as we did when we didn't need the manual approval. There we go. So we'll just call this one manually approved, like that. This one we'll just call approval results, like that. And of course, there's another outcome here is that we reject the purchase order. So we'll just type in rejected here. And then we're going to send a rejection email back to the customer saying, no, you placed too big an order for us to approve it. That's basically what we want to do in this process. Of course, after we've sent either of these two emails, we want the process to end. So we'll add what's called an endpoint. And we'll connect this one to that as well. So like that. And we'll just call this one the end. So this is basically our business process. And you can see that some of these arrows are red. That's because after these exclusive gateways, as they're called, we need to let the process know when to go either one way or the other. So let's start from the beginning at the start event up here. What do we want to have trigger this process? Well, as I told you before, inside of data service, we have this entity or table where if we enter a purchase order number into that table, we want this process to start. So what we can do is we can link this start event to that data entity. And we can do that by selecting it and then going over here in the right part of the design surface. And under the implementation part, we can select action, and we can select here, we want to wait for a connector event. And the connector we want to wait for an event from is a data fabric. I think I called it data service. It's called data fabric. I just want to make sure I select the right connection because I have that pre-made connection inside of our orchestrator. So inside the shared folder, I'll select the data fabric connection here. And then we can select the trigger. This is when a record is created. And then we can say which object do we want to react to a record being created on. That will be, of course, our order system. That's it. So now if we deployed this process and created a record in that entity or that table, this process would actually fire and run. It wouldn't do much because we've only implemented the trigger. But as soon as we've implemented all of the other parts, and it takes only a few minutes, then we can see this process run inside of the Maestro sort of runtime environment. So the next thing we want to have happen is to extract the purchase order. In order to extract the purchase order, we want to run an automation that can do that. And we built that and we saw it inside of Orchestrator. So I want to say start and wait for an RPA workflow like that. And then we can select what automation is it we want to run. And this is, of course, the PO extractor workflow inside of our shared bike shop RPA workflows folder in Orchestrator. That workflow will require one input because it needs to know which of the purchase orders to get from that storage bucket. So it'll need an order number. The way we can get that is we can we can collapse all of this stuff. And then from the start event here, we can actually find the order ID, because that start event receives that from the table inside of Data Fabric. So we'll select order ID, and now we've configured that task to run that RPA workflow that can extract that data for us. The next thing we want to do is we want to run that credit limit agent. We do that in much the same way. We over here select, in the action, we select start and wait for an agent. And then we can select which agent. We have the credit limit agent inside of Orchestrator. And now we can say to that agent, because it expects an order amount, so we can select, again, if we collapse these things, we can select from the extract PO, we can select the order total value that we get back from that RPA workflow. So now we've created and implemented an agent inside of our workflow. Now is the time to decide whether or not we need to manually approve this purchase order. So we select the gateway here, and then we have the conditions over here. We have auto approve, which is this route, and then we have requires approval, which is the lower route here. So if we go to the auto approve, we can go to an expression editor here, and we can say that the outcome of our credit limit agent, there's a Boolean value that is called requires approval. And we can just say if that is equal to true. No, this is the auto approve. So requires approval should be false, and save. And then we can select the other way here and set the condition for that and say that the credit limit requires approval value should be true, like that. So now we have sort of programmed it to know which way to go when it hits this decision point here. So if we need the manager to approve this purchase order, we want to run what's called an action task. We can select that over here, create an action app task, and then we select what action is it we want to take. We want to run this one called Simple Approval App, which is inside of our Bike Shop apps folder in Orchestrator. This thing expects a few inputs. First of all, we want to create a task title. We'll just call it please evaluate PO, and then we can insert the order ID of the PO. Then we can insert the order amount. Where do we get that? Well, we get that from our extract PO. We get the order total here. And the customer VAT number is basically how we identify the customer. So we can set that value as well by going to the extract PO and then select the customer VAT. And we're not going to use this comment for anything at all. So now we have also configured the running of the action app task. Next thing we want to have happen is we need to evaluate what did the manager do? Did he approve or reject the purchase order? So we need to set the conditions for these two values here. So in the case that he or she approves it, we want to go this way. And the condition for going that way is basically, if we go into the expression editor, that the manager approval action has a property called action here, and that needs to be equal to approve. And that's something we built into the action app when I built that. But for now, you just need to know that it needs to be approved. And for the other one over here, it is the opposite. We go into the expression editor and we say that the manager approval action needs to be equal to reject, and save. So all we have left to do now basically is we need to send the two emails, a confirmation email if things are good and a rejection email if things are not so good. So if we go to the send confirmation email, we can say here that the action we want to have happen here is that we can execute a connector activity. And now we need to select our connector. That was the Outlook 365. Again, I select my connection. It's going to auto select it, but I want to make sure that we select the one from the shared folder here. Then I select my activity. I can type in send. That'll show me the send email. And now I can send an email to myself like this. I can say that the subject is PO and then the order ID was approved. All good. I can put in the body of the email like that. Now, when I want to make sure for some reason it switches to save as draft here, so it doesn't actually send the mail. I'll just switch that off, and then I'll go down to the send rejection email, and then say that here is also a place where we want to execute a connector activity. We will again type in Outlook 365, select the exact correct Outlook connection, type in send to find the send email activity. And then after just a few seconds, or if we select it again here, we can type in my email address. We can type in PO, and then the number of the PO was rejected. And we'll just put in the body, go away. Who wants customers that buy a lot of stuff anyways? So, and again, with this one, also we want to just check, it switches to save as draft automatically. We want to not do that. So now what we have done is basically we have automated this whole process by linking each of the tasks and decision points and stuff inside of the business project to stuff that happens in the platform that we already built. So we're reusing a lot of stuff here, potentially. If we had like a ton of automations, this is how we can orchestrate it. And this is really the power of the agentic process and of Maestro. So before we deploy this, let's just rename it up here. We'll call this solution, we'll call this bike shop processes. And we'll call the agentic process itself, we'll call that we'll call it order intake, like that. So if I now go and publish it, basically I just say publish, and then I'll get a notification in just a second saying that now it has been published. Publishing is not the same as deploying it. So now I'll go to check the package. This will just say that now the package is ready. I can select deploy solution version over here. That will mean that I can choose where do I want to deploy it. I want to deploy it to the shared folder and activate it immediately. Before I activate it though, or fully deploy it, I want to review it, because when we get to this screen, we can see here that some of the artifacts over here on the left that this solution or this process consists of or is dependent upon, we can see that some of them are linked, and that means they are linked to the artifacts or the stuff that existed in the orchestrator beforehand. And it didn't, for some reason, select all of those. So we're going to manually do that, and that's why I wanted to review this. So I select the credit limit agent, and I say link to existing up here, and then select the agent that we already have in the platform. Now it says linked as well. We will say the PO extractor. This is the RPA workflow that extracts stuff from the PDF. We will also link to that pre-existing one. And for the approval app, we will do that as well. For some reason, I can't do it for the workflow here that is associated with the approval app, but that's beside the point. Now we've linked everything we need to link. Now I can say deploy. And when I say deploy and we go to this screen, what we can see inside the shared folder is that now we have a folder called bike shop processes. And if we go into that, we can see that we have an automation called order intake. We can see we have a trigger for that process. If we go to the event triggers, called the order intake event trigger start event, this is the one that reacts to me doing stuff inside of that data fabric entity. In fact, if we go back to the process itself here, the order intake process, I didn't mean to click it, and then click over here on the right and click edit. If we just click next here, we can see all the stuff that it's dependent upon. And we can see down here, there's an app that it can't quite figure out where to find. So I'm just going to overwrite that and then select the simple approval app. Now everything that it needs to be able to run this process is available. We can click update. And now we have an agentic process. So what does this mean? Well, we have this thing I've mentioned it quite a few times. Let me just go away from the process here. We'll go into Data Fabric first, and then I'll open another window for Maestro itself. So this is where we want to enter an order number that will trigger the entire process. So once we enter an order number here in the table here, we should see a new job fire inside of Orchestrator in our jobs folder, as we do with any normal RPA workflow. What we should also see inside Maestro, and right now Maestro is pretty much empty, but what we can see is, if we go to process instances, is that there's no data here. We haven't run our process, or any process for that matter, in Maestro yet. So if we go, first of all, to jobs, we want to monitor this jobs folder. And once I enter a purchase order number into that table, we will see a job fire up here. Then I'll quickly switch to the RPA workflows folder. We should see a job fire up in there as well. I've done some testing a few hours ago, as you can see. So let's monitor the bike shop processes folder here, and then go to our entity and say we want to enter some data. And I'll just enter a purchase order number that I know is valid. And if I now go to the jobs folder, we can see that the agentic process is running. Immediately after that, we can go to the RPA workflows, and we can see that the PO extractor is running. And pretty soon we'll see an agent running as well. It's not fired up yet. But what we can also do is we can go into Maestro itself. And if I just press the F5 button here, we can now see that there's an order intake process running here. And if we click that, we can see all of the instances of that process that has been run historically. But we can also click on this. This blue icon signifies that this one is running right now. So we can go into that and see how far along is it. Well, it's still extracting that purchase order. Now it's asking that agent about the credit limit for this purchase order. And if I remember correctly, this purchase order is above the limit for automatic approval. So it should go to the manager approval step in just a second. And let's say, well, it did. I've done this a couple of times, I have to admit. And now it's just waiting for us to manually approve this. And normally, this would mean, when you're using that action app task, that an email would be sent to a person who would then click a link in that email. And what they would see is basically a little form with that information. A shortcut to that form, when we are sort of debugging and playing around here, is to click the task. And then down here is a link to that task. If I click Open App Task, it will open what is called Action Center. And inside of Action Center, you can assign tasks to a user. This task has not yet been assigned to a user, so I will assign it to myself, because I like assigning stuff to myself. And when I do that, it will land in my pending tasks inbox over here. And when I click it, it'll just need a few seconds to load. And now we can see that customer such and such, this is the VAT number of the customer that it found inside of the purchase order document, has placed an order with a total amount of 58,000, approve or reject. How do we feel today? Anyways, let's quickly go back to the instance here. And the minute I click approve or reject, we should see this go in either direction. So let's reject this one. Jump back. And now we should see that the approval result has been registered, and it sends a rejection email. And if we checked my inbox now on my email address, we should see that email have landed there. So what does this mean? Well, this means that we can follow the process as it runs. We're not going to do that in real life. We have better stuff to do. But when something goes wrong, we can go in here and see where did it go wrong. We can also see a bunch of statistics. If I go back here to sort of the overview image, let me just zoom in a little bit. If we just refresh this, a good way to tickle it is to switch the filter down here. Now we can see that, and this data is a little bit delayed, but in fact, it still thinks it's running. But we can see that it has run one time. It has registered one start event. It has extracted one PO. It has called the credit limit agent once. It has made this decision once. And in that case, it landed down here. And for some reason, it still thinks it's running. There's a little bit of delay. When we've run this a few more times, we can see some more interesting numbers here. So let's just quickly go ahead and do that. I'll go into my order system data entity here, and then I'll add data. I'll set this little check mark down at the bottom, because then I can just add a few more very quickly. And I'll enter 2387. I don't think that PO exists. Maybe it does. We'll see. But if we now go back to our instance manager here, go out to the main page, we can see that now a bunch of more processes have been kicked into action. So these 4 are running. 5, sorry, not good with the numbers. If I refresh, we can see over here that one of them finished and one of them failed. Which one failed? I'm guessing it's the one that I just entered that random order ID into. So for the other 3, if we go back into Action Center, I would suspect that there are now 3 actions inside Action Center waiting to be assigned to someone. There we go. We have 3 of them. I will assign to a user for all 3, assign to myself, assign to myself, and of course with the last one, assign to myself. And there's a reason why I want to run several of these processes, and I'll show you that in just a second. In the pending screen, in the inbox, we can now see these, and now I can act on them. I will approve the first one. Let's reject a couple. And reject that one as well. If we go back to the processes, we can now see that they're running again. They're not paused, but we will see them hopefully finish. If we just go into one of them, we can see what's going on. Actually, that one just finished. So if we go back to the main screen, they are all finished, all 3 of them. Now, one thing I really like about this, and this is why I kind of did this on purpose with the faulty PO number, is that it couldn't find the PO with that number. So here in the extract PO, I can see that there's a variable called order number with the order number 82387, and that doesn't exist. So what do? So we can actually edit this variable, and we can just go in and say, okay, we'll just type in 60, and then update that variable inside the process. And now we can retry or continue the process from that point. So now I'll retry it with that new order number that I entered in the middle of the run. I know it was in the beginning, but in the middle of a run. And now it can then run that process and run that process to completion. I forget if this specific purchase order needs approval or not. We'll see in just a second. And it does need approval, so I'll click the approval thing here. Go to details, open the app task, go in and approve it. And the best thing is yet to come. So I'll assign it to myself. Assign, go to the pending box. Now it's been assigned to me and I can approve or reject it. I will just reject it because I'm in a bad mood today. So and go back to the instance management, and now we can see that it's finishing up. It just sent the rejection email to the customer. So what else is new? If we go out to the main screen here where we have all of the instances that we have sort of run, let's see how it's doing on the statistics up here. It's doing kind of okay. Actually, it's doing very, very well. It has run 6 instances. We can see 6 start events. We can see that it's been run 6 times. There's been 1 incident, as it's called. We can also see that the credit limit has been run 6 times. This decision 6 times. Manager approval 5 times. Now it says 2 up here in the send confirmation email. That's because 5 and 2 doesn't add up to 6, but that's because the manager approval once approved a PO, so that was sent up here, and that's why it sent 2 confirmation emails, once auto-approved and 1 manually approved, and then there's 4 that have been rejected, and that adds up to the 6 runs over here at the end as well. So this gives us sort of an impression of what has been run and how many times. If we go to monitoring in here, it gets even better, because here we can see a heat map of what has been going on inside our process. Where does it spend its time? It spends a lot of time extracting the PO. It spends some time on the credit limit agent, but it spends a whole lot of time on the manager approval. The sending of the email and the decisions along the way, it doesn't take very much time, but we can see here, and this is something we can use in order to optimize our process. And I could go on for a long time. In fact, if I went into this optimize tab up here, it says no data available. That's because it's still sort of chewing through all of that data, but that would actually show us some process mining type information where it would actually point out where can we make improvements, where does things take time, where do most of the errors happen, and things like that, and stuff that we can also use to improve this overall business process that we've now automated. So Maestro, if you ask me, very, very, very exciting product. I know this was a quick run through. I know it took quite a while, but I think it really shows what the power of Maestro is. Take the process, the business process, and once initiated in the real world, initiate that process inside of Maestro with some kind of trigger so that you can follow that process as it runs inside of Maestro. It's really, really exciting. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure you give it a like, thumbs up, and maybe subscribe to my channel. I have a lot of more both Maestro and Agent and document understanding stuff coming out. So make sure you subscribe, and thank you for watching this time. See you.